Hi and welcome to part 2 of this SONICWARE Liven Bass&Beats tutorial. Part 1 covered a quick start guide and everything we need to know about how to program drums into the Bass&Beats. Part 2 will cover everything we need to know about bass. If there's anything that seems to be missing from this video, it's likely that it's already been covered in part 1, so please make sure you watch that first to get a good grounding of how the Bass&Beats operates. So with that in mind, let's dive in. So the first thing I'm going to do is load up a fresh pattern, as we did before. So I'm going to press the pattern button, scroll through to bank 5 and press step 1, and that loads pattern 1 in bank 5. At the moment I'm still on the drum track, so when we play we'll hear drum sounds. To select the bass track, just press bass here. And we'll get the standard bass sound load up by default. So obviously we can play it with the keys, we can use the octave buttons to go up and down the different octaves. We can use the memory knob here to select a different sound within the bank that we've got selected. So there's lots of different sounds in that bank, and then if we hold shift we access the text written in lowercase, so we can select different banks. So we've got lots of different named banks again here. So we've got, like, say for example, the FX bank, rises, and lots of different sounds in. Let's just go back to that first bank, down to the growl one, and then we'll select that first sound. So as we tweak these assign knobs, different things will happen depending on the patch that we've just loaded. So that's creating like an LFO type sound on this patch, and then this knob will, it adds in a higher part to the sound, but these will vary depending on which sound you have loaded. So just have them play through, load different sounds, tweak, assign knobs 1 and 2, and you can get lots of effects going. The dimension knob will affect the width of any unison that's been programmed into the sounds. A good example of this is if we go through and load up the mule sound, and then hold a key and turn this knob, and you'll hear that the width of the unison will change from being centered to spread. So that won't always affect the sounds you load. It depends if it's been programmed in the deep edit mode, which we'll get to later. So the bass engine is monophonic, but there are 2 different playback modes. If we press the bass button again, we'll switch between legato and mono. So legato won't re-trigger the envelopes when a new sound is played, whereas mono will. So as an example of that, if we load up the torque sound in bank 1, that's got an envelope that decays. If we hold a key, in legato mode it's just going to glide between. If we press again and go to mono, that's going to re-trigger. Both of these have their own glide settings, so if you hold function and press bass again, that gets us the glide setting. So we can change this. And that tells it how long it's going to take to go between those notes. So again, if we switch back to legato, that's going to be instant because it's got its own glide setting. So function and bass, we can turn that up. There. As we did in the drum part of the Bass&Beats, we can use function shift to shift lock, and then we can use this knob to change the velocity of the notes being played and programmed into the sequence. Depending again on how the sound has been programmed, this may affect the tone. So for example here, the cutoff is moving around depending on the velocity, because that's the way the sound has been programmed. And we press shift again to get out of shift lock mode. On the second row of knobs, we've got a simple LFO here that we can control with the rate and depth knobs. So rate on its own will do nothing until we turn the depth up. So as an extra LFO, there are 2 LFOs that we can program from the deep edit mode, and we've got this extra one that we can use for vibrato during performances and to program into the sequence. I'll just turn that down again. So the release and gate changes the length of the release of the sound, and also if we program notes into the sequence we can shorten them. Again, it's dependent on how the sound has been programmed. If a sound has no release programmed into it, we can't affect the release. with the release and gate knob. That's because this multiplies the current value. So as long as the sound has some release, we can affect it. And the machine gun is, again, it's a bit like another LFO. It's a square LFO that will chop your sound. So this can be used for expression, again, when we're programming and playing our sequences. Another way that we can affect the pitch is with the sweep control. This is switched on and off here, so we hold function and press the octave buttons. So as you can see, they're marked sweep. So if we press the down one, we get a downward sweep, and up for an upward sweep. So that's a downward sweep and an upward sweep. And then if we press the one that's lit, when we hold function again, we'll turn it off. So let's just go back in and turn that on so it's up. And then we can control the speed and the range using these two knobs with shift held. So if you turn that speed up, it's going to be longer, and down will be quicker. And then we've got a range here in semitones, so we can go all the way up to 2 octaves and all the way down to a single semitone. Again, these settings can be automated, so this is a great way to add loads of depth to your sequences. So I'm just going to turn that off again, so hold function and press that, and we're back to a standard bass sound. Adding notes into our sequences works much the same way as it does in the drum track, apart from in the bass track there are a few little extra things we need to be aware of. One of them being tied notes. So if we hold function, here we get a tied note function that we can turn on and off. This means that if we're recording in real time or pasting long notes into the sequence, this will create one long note, whereas if tied notes switched off, that will create lots of separate notes. So as an example, if we go into record mode, press a step, hold a key and press another step, that creates one long note. If we do that with tied turn off, we're just going to get lots of separate notes. So be aware when you're sequencing that this could affect the way that things are recorded. A good way to build up a sequence is just to hold steps and paste notes in. Like that. Then we can hold clear and press the steps to get rid of them again. Real-time recording works in the same way, so if we hold function and turn on the metronome, so we've got a bit of reference for timing. And then that next one along is our pre-count function. You can hit record and play. And we can record sequences like that. If we're in record mode and we're not playing, we can still add notes in. And then select new steps. Or if we turn on our auto step function, which is in the system auto step, turn that on, and then if we place a note in here, it's going to move automatically onto the next step. So let's turn that metronome off again, because I don't think we need that now. So metronome and pre-count both down to 0. So just as in the drum track, we've got a pattern setting menu for the bass track. So if we hold function and press this one, that will change the length of this number of steps in this pattern on the bass channel, so we can turn it down to 1 step all the way up to 64, and that will wrap around on these keys. Let's just put that back to 16. And then the next setting is note, so this is the length of each one of these steps relative to the tempo. So if we turn it up, it will go twice as fast. Or we can go down and we can get longer step values against the metronome. A random function we've looked at already in the previous video, we can transpose it up and down by a semitone, so I can turn this, say, to 2 semitones down, or I can crank it up like that. We've got our swing setting. That's going to alter the rhythm of our playback, so higher values will be more extreme. So if you program, say, a shuffling hi-hat pattern, you might want to change the bass to match. So there's one more setting we need to talk about, and that's the dice function. That's here. At 100%, that's going to play all these notes, and then as we turn it down, there's less and less probability that will get triggered. Which is an interesting way of getting some generative stuff going. As with everything else on these knobs, that can be automated using the parameter lock function. So you could set one step to only trigger every 25%, for example. It's probably a bit more useful used that way. Talking of parameter locks, now would be a good time to check that out. So we've got a sequence programmed in. Our parameter lock button is green, so it's switched on. We can now start to sequence different settings, so we can use these as sine knobs as a good example. So a sine 1 in this case is a cutoff. So at the moment that's not being moved by our parameter locks, but we can make it move. So if I wanted, say for example, these two steps to be a different value, I can hold a step, turn that knob, and then it will remember that. So we can go through our sequence and edit every single tiny little detail using that method. If I want to clear that, I just hold clear and press parameter lock, and that would have gone. If I want to real-time record those parameter lock settings, I just need to hold function, press parameter lock, and it'll turn red. And then as we play, those movements will be recorded per step. There's another trick that parameter locks has up its sleeve, and that's sound locking. So if we hold function and press parameter locks until it turns orange, each new step will remember which bass program was selected when it was programmed. So obviously we're on the talk setting at the moment. If we go to something else, say that, and then we post that note in here and go back to talk, this note should play as that sound that we just loaded. So you can build up really, really complex sequences like that. Alternatively, you can just automate the patch selection, but that's a lot more random. So let's have a look at the ducking knob. This is a basic sidechain compression. What this means is that anytime there's a bass sound playing and there's also a kick playing, either in kick 1 or kick 2 over on the drum channel, the volume of the bass will be brought down. Now how quickly it fades back in again is controlled by the ducking knob. So at the moment, that isn't going to do anything at all. So we've got to go into the drum track and then paste in a few kick drums. So I'll just do that here quickly, just a 4/4. And as we bring this ducking knob up, you'll be able to hear it start to affect the bass. So it depends on the bass sound and the kick sound and what you're trying to achieve as to how high you need to turn it up. There's usually a sweet spot that sounds really good. It's also worth experimenting with the ghost sidechain setting. That is in the drum pattern setting menu. If you scroll through, you'll see ghost sidechain. If you turn this on, the kick will still produce the same effect even if the kick drum is muted from the mute mode. So the last thing we need to look at before we go on to deep edit is just the effects. So I'm just going to go back into the bass channel. We've still got this going. And we can turn on the effects here with the effects button, hold function and select the effects type. So I'm just going to do, I don't know, good old delay. And then we turn up the effects, send them out by holding shift and turning this knob here. With the effects parameter being affected by this knob. Please be aware that there's only one effect slot. This is shared between the drum and the bass. So if you change it on the bass side, it will change on the drum side also. Speaking of which, this is also shared from the line in. So we've got a function and effects send from the line in here to the effects unit. And this knob will control how much audio is coming in from an external device that is connected to the line-in socket here. The line-in is also affected by the ducking control, by the way, so you can use this sidechain compression effect on external devices. So I think that pretty much covers everything in the pattern edit mode. So now it's time to take a look at deep editing our sounds. We do this by holding function and pressing the memory edit here. That's another word for bass edit. And then we are presented with the bank and patch select screen that we can preview the sound that we're going to edit. And we can use the bank selections here. So I'm going to go down a bank to bank 8 because these are empty. Pick an empty sound and then press OK. So now in edit mode, we need our overlay on, which is the pink overlay. Just as a quick overview, we've got a bunch of knobs up the top here. This prominent 4 at the top is our main ADSR envelope, which you can also access down here. We've got 3 knobs here that are just for testing our sounds. The levels of these aren't saved within the sounds, they're just for testing the various edits that we make. We've got 2 identical wavetable oscillators here. We've got a subtype knob here, and then we've got an overall memory level. And these 2 value knobs are used for tweaking the parameters that we select. The bass engine in the Bass&Beats is semi-modular. So these rubber buttons here are used mostly for selecting modules and turning them on and off, and also routing. Whereas the step keys below are used for selecting the parameters within each module, so that we can route envelopes to position of the wavetable, that kind of thing. So the function button has moved to here that we hold to access the lowercase letters beneath the buttons. We've also got a page button that selects between 2 different pages of parameters on the steps. We can play the keys like normal, and we've got an octave down button here, but to go back up in the octaves we need to press function, and the octave down button will take us back up again. Alternatively, you can just cycle around. At the top we've got this ADSR, which is a standard ADSR volume envelope, so if we want a soft attack we can turn this up. If we want to raise that sustain level a bit to make it a bit louder, we can do that. If we want a bit more release on, we can do that. So by default, one of the wavetable oscillators is switched on, and that's here. We can alter the wavetable that we've got selected by turning this knob. There's lots and lots of different wavetables that we can access. If we want to move the position within that wavetable, we select the position. So we've got oscillator 1 selected, select position, and that will change. Depending on which wavetable we've got, we'll get different results. And there's lots to choose from. So let's just go back to the standard one for now. So if we want to turn on wavetable 2, we hold function and press oscillator 2, and that's now on, which is this one. As you can hear, they're both going, so we've got 2 overlapping oscillators. So I'll just turn that off again. There's also a sub oscillator, which is off by default too, which is here. So function and sub turns it on. And then we've got the type knob over here. That's going to alter the type of waveform that the sub oscillator produces. And then there's also noise, so we can turn that on here. And the same is true of the LFOs and envelopes. So by default these aren't lit up, so the LFOs aren't switched on. So you can cycle them on and off by holding function and pressing the various buttons, including these 2 envelopes at the end here, so they're not on to begin with. So within each module we have settings for that module. So here I've got oscillator 1 selected. If I press here, I'm selecting pitch, and I can alter the pitch with these 2 value knobs. Coarse settings on the lower value knob, and fine settings using the encoder. So as I go through, I've got the start phase for each oscillator, which won't make any difference in sound unless there's 2 overlapping, by the way. The position that we just mentioned, so that moves around within the wavetable. We've got the overall level, which we can change from here. This is an output routing, so we can route the oscillator before our distortion module, and we can route it bypassing the distortion module and going into the filter, or we can bypass the filter completely, so we're just getting raw output from the oscillator. On page 2 of each oscillator, we've got this shaper. There's lots of different types of wave shaping that we can do with an adjustable parameter each. And as we go through, we've got all sorts of different types. The very last two, FM and ring modulation, or frequency modulation and ring modulation, these affect the way the two oscillators interact with each other. So this is quite a deep subject. I think I'll cover that in a separate video. We've got, if I just turn it off again. To start with, we've got our unison settings here. So we can set the number of voices of unison. If we can turn it up to 6. We can set the detune amount. We still won't hear anything yet until we select blend, and this brings in the unison. So we can get these huge sounds going. While unison is being used, we can use the dimension knob per oscillator to change the width of that unison. So I'm just going to turn off oscillator 1 and switch the sub on here and change this type so you can hear it on a mobile device. Let's go for a saw. This is slightly simpler. So it's an algorithmic oscillator rather than a wavetable oscillator. So you haven't got all the settings. So don't be surprised if you see dashes here. Page 1 has pitch and phase, but we haven't got position. We've got level. We've got an output routing. We haven't got the shapers either. And we can't affect it with unison. So it's a much simpler oscillator. So I'm going to turn that off and then go to noise. Switch that on. So we've got a level setting on page 1, which just changes how loud it is. And then if we cycle around to page 2, we've got a type of noise. There's lots of different types of noise. There's your basic flavors plus all these different kind of sampled ones. Things like vinyl and water and that kind of thing. Let's turn that off and then just let's push oscillator 1 back on again. So our next setting is the filter, which again is off by default. So function and filter will turn it on, and then we have to select our type on page 2. Page 2, which again is off by default. We can cycle around to a low pass, for example, and then back to page 1. We can select the cutoff, and this setting is going to get our resonance for that filter. So that's something to be aware of as you're editing sounds. Quite a lot of the modules are turned off. The filter in particular is off, and also the type is not selected. So you have to switch on the module and change its type before it will have any effect. Lastly, in the filter, there is a distortion setting on page 2. So if we're rooted, as we said before, on oscillator 1, page 1, pre-distortion, yeah, we are. We can go through to page 2 here, and we can change the distortion level. It's also important to remember that these numbers aren't just settings that we can set and leave. We can target that with an LFO, so we can actually change the distortion amount with an LFO as the sound plays. Speaking of which, we've got an LFO next, so let's just turn off that filter. Go to the LFO and switch it on, and then I want to cycle back to page 1, which is our shape, so we can alter the shape. We've got lots of different shapes, sine, all these different kind of stepped shapes and pulses and lots of different things. Our rate, and then our depth is basically the volume of the LFO. On page 2, there is a LFO delay. The more we turn this up, the longer it's going to take for the LFO to start. We've got a sync setting, which takes over from the rate. So this will sync the LFO at the BPM, or a division of it. And then we've got a phase setting. So again, we can set the start position of the LFO to wherever we want it to be. Let's just turn that off again, and then we've got 3 envelopes. So one is the standard volume envelope that mirrors these settings up here, and we've got 2 more extra envelopes that we can use to send to various things to move them around. If we go to page 1 on the envelope, we are accessing these settings. So we've got again our attack, which we can soften, decay, sustain, and release, and that's true of these 2 envelopes as well. On page 2, we've got our depth. That is the volume of the envelope. This is quite useful as a target to access how much an envelope influences another parameter, so we can get into lots of complex routing. We've got a delay, again, which will delay the start of the envelope by a set amount of time, And we've got an up curve and down curve settings. That will alter the shape of the up and down curve parts of the envelope. And one other little note here is the voice setting. This is a playback mode. So if you hold function and press the ADSR, we've got a choice again of mono and legato. This isn't saved within the patch. This again is just for demoing how it sounds depending on whether our play style is mono or legato. So I've made some settings here that I don't want to keep. I can do one of two things. I can press clear. That backs me out to the patch selection menu and just erases all those settings, so we're just back to a default sound. Or alternatively, from within the edit mode, I can hold function and press initialize here, and that will just wipe the patch. Now to demonstrate how routing works, I'm just going to change the wavetable. So we've got oscillator 1 switched on. Just going to cycle through to something a bit brighter, like that. So I'm going to route an envelope over to the wavetable. I'm just going to select this envelope, turn it on, and then just alter its settings a bit. So I'm going to turn up the attack and turn up the decay and turn down the sustain. So that's a rise and fall. And then to route, we just tap the envelope again. So it starts to flash. I then get to choose a destination. So we've got oscillator 1 selected. I'm going to press position and I'm going to dial in the amount that this is being sent to this. So I'm going to turn this up to maximum. And then to end our routing, we just press this again to make it stop. So now, modulation envelope 1 is routed to the position within oscillator 1. So that is moving within that wavetable. We can change the wavetable and we can hear it moving in different ones too. So that's a good way of previewing what the different wavetables sound like rather than having to constantly change the position by hand. So again, I'm going to initialize this. Back to our default sound. So if we want to do a similar thing with the LFO, it's best to start from a mid position because the LFOs are bipolar. So we select our wavetable, we choose our oscillator, we select our position, and we can dial this up to about 63, which will be in the middle. And then choose an LFO, switch it on, again tap the LFO again so it's flashing, position, and then dial in the amount. So again, if you select 63, that will cycle between the maximum and minimum that's available within the wavetable. Which is going to get us that. So LFO1 again to stop routing. So now we can have a look at the way these assign knobs work. So I've got the velocity and assign knobs here, which are just for demoing, but then I've got velocity and assign sources here on the buttons. So if I press assign 1, that just selects it, and assign 1 again, that is going to allow us to route this on something. So we can pick our LFO1 and our rate, and we can dial in an amount on here, and we can test it. So there we go, we've routed assign 1 to the LFO speed. If I also wanted to route that assign knob to something else at the same time, we can do that too. So I'm going to turn on noise, for example, turn the level down to nothing, and then go assign 1 again to get it to flash. Then I can pick noise and change the amount that it's affecting its level. So let's dial all the way up to 127, I mean. So now that's set up to simultaneously affect the LFO1 speed and the noise level. So we can route these assign knobs to lots of different things and get some really complex sounds going. So I'm just going to initialize again, function and initialize, and I'll show you how to set up the assign knob 2. So to access this, we need to use the function button because the source of assign knob 2 is below assign knob 1. So hold function, press that twice, and then we're in routing mode for assign knob 2. So I'm going to send this to oscillator 1 pitch, but I'm going to do it in a negative value. So if we turn the value knob down below the middle, that's going to give us negative amounts. This means that when we turn up assign knob 2, the pitch of oscillator 1 is going to go down. So again, you can set up some really complex routings by having certain knobs do things in the opposite way. So let's just exit that. I'm going to initialize again, and we'll talk about the velocity knob. Now velocity is already routed somewhere by default. If we select the velocity source here, press it twice, we can see the amp envelope is flashing, and if we cycle through to depth on page 2, it's set to 127. This means that the velocity is affecting the volume of the patch. So as we play, lower velocities are going to play softer notes, and higher velocities louder notes. Let's just back that off to 100 somewhere. But I'm also going to send it somewhere else. So I'm going to turn on the filter like this, and then on page 2, select our type. I'm going to go to page 1 and turn the cutoff down. And I'm going to turn the resonance up a little bit so we can hear it moving. So that's what our filter sounds like. If we now go back to velocity and then route that to the cutoff, so we're in page 1, frequency, let's give it quite a bit. And then as we move the velocity around, we should be able to hear the filter moving. So velocity is now routed to volume and the cutoff, so we can get some expressive playing going. So as you can imagine, there's a huge amount of different ways this can be set up. There's just absolutely tons of potential. I'm not going to try and show everything here. I will do some more patch creation videos in the future to show a few more examples. But there's just a few more things to tidy up. So next to our initialize, we've got a data menu. So if we hold function and press OK, we've got a copy function, so we can copy in a patch from somewhere else. We've got a patch export. We can export our patches via MIDI using a program like MIDI-OX that captures sysx information, just a way of backing up our patches. We press it again. We've got a wavetable import. This is something that we can use to overwrite the different wavetables within the Bass&Beats with our own, which is something I'll show in a bit. And then we've got wavetable export, which is the same the other way. We can export wavetables out of the Bass&Beats. At this point, if we wanted to save this patch, we can just press OK. We get to choose a memory location, so I'll choose this, press OK again, and then we get to name it. So we can use the value knob to change the letters in the display, and the bank to change the position. The ones in between the letters are little dots that we can turn on and off. And then we just press OK, and then it's done. And then we're exit back into the pattern edit mode. So here's how we can make our own wavetables for the Bass&Beats. To do this, you're going to need a MIDI interface and a piece of software called MIDI-OX, which is free. And you need to find some wavetables. So I've found some free examples on the internet that I'll share below that I'm going to use for this demonstration. During development, we used a VST called Serum to make wavetables for the Bass&Beats, so there's lots of free examples of these around. We need to go to SONICWARE.jp downloads page. We need to click on the wavetable converter, and this will open a separate tab in your browser that we can drop a WAV file into, and it's going to turn it into a sysx format file that we can then upload into the Bass&Beats. So all we need to do is find the file that we want to convert, we drag it into here, we give it a name. I'm going to call this S growl, something like that. And then I'm going to click download. I'll turn it into a sysx file, and then we just need to find that in our browser, and then we use it in MIDI-OX. So here's the file we created. This is a MIDI sysx format file, and here is MIDI-OX. Now I've created a video about how to update the libens, which gives a lot more information about MIDI-OX and how to set it up. There's also a setup guide over on SONICWARE's website. That guide also gives information on how to do this on Mac, because MIDI-OX is Windows only. The guide also gives a lot more technical information than I'm able to give here. The link is just above the wavetable transfer software that you'll find on the download page. But we need to make sure in MIDI devices that the output that we've got the Liven connected to is lit like this, and then we press OK. We can drop our MIDI sysx file in, and we're presented with the sysx window. So at this point we need to set up the Liven ready to receive the file. So back over the Bass&Beats, here's our MIDI cable going to MIDI in. We need to go into edit mode if we're not already. It doesn't really matter which sound we're editing. And then we need to go to function data menu. So we scroll through until we get to wavetable import. Wait a second, and that will ask us to choose a place to put it. So there's 64 slots. I'm going to go back one from the first wavetable that loads to the last one, and then press OK, and that will say import, so it's waiting for that file to be sent over. So once you've done that, you need to go to Command Window, send sysx, and that will send the file over. Now that we've clicked send, it's now saying receive in the menu, and we're getting a progress bar here. So we've just got to wait for that to finish. So as soon as that's done, we're asked to press save, so press OK. So that's written that wavetable we downloaded over one of the presets. So if we scroll through here, we'll see we've got that S-growl sound. So if we go to position like we did before, we've now got a new wavetable to play with. So I really hope you found this tutorial useful. Please let me know in the comments below if you have any questions, any requests for sort of example patches and that kind of thing. So yeah, thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you again in the future. Cheers.